Welcome to NDISC Chatroom. My name is Anne, and I'm an NDISC Fellow. I'm here with Professor Stephen Pincus. Professor Pincus, would you be able to summarize your seminar and your main argument?
Yeah, so the seminar paper comes out of a book which I'm just finishing, sending to press in June, and the central question is why did Britain gain an empire in South Asia at the same time that it lost one in North America? And the answer that I give is to say, first of all, that you might think that answering such a question, since it happened in the 1760s and 1770s, is to look at just the 1760s and 1770s. But I argue that actually a set of institutions were established in later 17th and early 18th century England and then Britain, which shaped and constrained the contours of political, social, and international maneuver. And the fundamental argument is that I make is that the reason why Britain gained an empire in South Asia at the same time it lost one in North America is that the Tory party had come into political power in the 1760s, and they pursued a political economic strategy focused on trying to pay down the British national debt by gaining territorial empire. To pay down the debt, they started ratcheting up taxes on British North America, which led to famous cries like "no taxation without representation." But that didn't generate a lot of revenue. What did generate a lot of revenue was consolidating a huge territorial empire in South Asia, which they thought was going to pay down the debt to the tune of around £2 million a year at the same time that the debt was in the tens of millions. So the whole goal was to pay down the debt, and in doing so, they upset people in North America, but not only in North America, in Ireland, in the Caribbean, in England itself, but they were able to consolidate an empire in South Asia.
In your read-ahead, you specifically make reference to the division between a first British Empire and a second British Empire, but you also highlight the continuity of partisan debate within the British Empire. So I'm wondering if you subscribe to that notion of British history?
No, absolutely not. So I mean, it's a standard view that there's a first and second British Empire, an empire. Some say, I mean, the original claim was that there was a swing to the east, that the first British Empire was focused on the Atlantic, the second British Empire was focused on Asia. Others claim that it moved from being an empire of settlement to an empire of conquest. Others insist that it moved from an empire where everybody agreed what the imperial project was to one in which there was deep divisions about what the imperial project was. Still others say that the first British Empire was an empire created without a state, whereas the second British Empire was a state project. I argue all of this is wrong, that there was settlement and conquest in both periods, that Britain was very much involved in the East long before the 1760s. So, for example, Britain established, or England established, a central trading base in Bombay in the 1660s, not in the 1760s. They also had bases in Madras, what will become Chennai, in Calcutta, what will become Kolkata, and in Indonesia in the 17th century. And there continued to be settlements. I mean, from a U.S. perspective, it might seem like there was a swing away from North America, but Britain did retain control of Canada and most of the Caribbean well into the 20th century. So there was no geographic swing to the east. It's true that obviously there were settlements in North America in the 17th and 18th centuries, but there were settlements in places like Australia, New Zealand in the 19th century. So again, there wasn't a shift from settlement to conquest, and of course there were conquests in, at least from a Native American perspective, in the 17th and 18th centuries, and Britain did, after all, conquer French Canada in the 18th century. So I don't see there as a shift from settlement to conquest. The notion that that there was no debate about what the imperial project was, that there was a sort of unified imperial project in the 17th and 18th century, is a story told by those who know nothing about the 17th and 18th century. There were deep divisions between Tory and patriot political economic projects about what the empire was. So these divisions persist into the 19th, 20th, and 20th century. And the notion that there was no British state to speak of in the 17th and 18th century is completely fallacious. In fact, Britain had one of the most robust and efficient states in all of Europe from 1688 onwards. So there was an extremely powerful state, and it looks even more powerful if one considers the state as an imperial state rather than just its European state.
And Britain seems very distinct from its contemporary imperial states at this time, as like France and Spain, they didn't have this kind of partisan debate. So what made Britain different?
Britain had a robust public sphere where there were public debates, newspapers throughout the empire. So England began to have a newspaper culture in the 1620s, which exploded and expanded dramatically in the 1640s and 1650s. But already one would get newspapers in places like North America, Ireland, Scotland, throughout the Caribbean in the early 18th century. So there were newspapers everywhere. The first newspaper to be regularly published in Spanish America took place in the 1790s. So you have a huge difference. And there were no newspapers being published in the French colonies again until much later. So there was a kind of robust public sphere. Now, these newspapers didn't just toe the party line. In fact, most newspapers tended to be critical of what the government was doing. So there was a robust debate about what kind of an empire one wanted right across the empire. I should say there were also newspapers in British South Asia. So most famously, there were newspapers being published in Calcutta in the 1780s. But we now know that there was a first set of newspapers being published in Bombay in the 1670s. So again, robust public debate. Now, one has to ask why it was that there was this robust public debate in Britain and not in France and not in the Spanish Empire. That's been a hotly contested issue. I'm not going to sort of resolve that in our discussion right now, but I will say I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that political power in Britain was very closely associated with the mercantile classes, the commercial classes, and they had an interest in having information circulate because they needed to know what the markets were what the markets were like where they were sending goods. So I think the sort of precocious commercialization of Britain and more importantly, the relationship between that commercialization and the people who held political power, the people who sat in Parliament, I think was a vital difference.
Okay, interesting. I'd like to shift gears a little bit. Some people would characterize America as an empire in decline. I don't know if that completely fits with your definition of empire as you defined in your read-ahead, but I am wondering if you see any parallels between British Empire, American current state of...
Yeah, so let me first of all say, I define empire as a state ruling over different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions. And that's as in contradistinction to a nation state where the ideal of the nation state is homogeneity, that everybody's part of the nation. So I absolutely see America, the United States of America, as an empire. I think it's always been an empire. And I say that not just because the people, at the first anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, all of the sermons delivered celebrating it claimed that the Declaration of Independence made the United States into an empire, but I also because definitionally, it was always one which accepted difference. In fact, the very form of a federal government is one which suggests that they're that different states, for example, can have different laws. So I do see it as an empire. I see one of the characteristics of empires, I take huge inspiration from my former colleague Paul Kennedy in the rise and fall of great powers, in which he says, he says a lot of things. Most famously, he talks about imperial overreach leading to decline. But one of the things he says is that empires decline when the subjects of states, great powers decline when the subjects of those great powers no longer think that their lives are better because of imperial governance. So I think that that's a relevant way to think about American imperial influence. That is to say, do not just people living within the continental United States, Hawaii and Alaska, but also people who live in dependent territories like Puerto Rico or Guam, as well as people who live under American informal influence, whether they think that relationship with the United States helps them or hurts them. And I don't know very much about, I can't sort of give you specifics about how they feel about that, but that strikes me as the relevant question. It was the relevant question for Britain. It's will always be the relevant question for the United States.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.